My name is Thea, and I am 38 years old. For my entire adult life, I have been the family's designated worrier, the on-call crisis manager, the one who lived just 10 minutes down the road while my younger brother, Julian, lived a glamorous life 1,000 miles away. When my mother, Rosalind, was diagnosed with dementia, the roles we had played our whole lives were cast in stone. Julian, the family favorite, offered thoughts and prayers from his beach house, while I became a full-time caregiver overnight. He thought my quiet competence was an infinite resource he could rely on forever. He didn't know I was about to find our mother's hidden journals while cleaning out the family home. Journals that held a devastating secret about him that would expose the true cost of being the golden child. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about the discovery that blew my family apart, hit like and subscribe to hear more true stories about the hidden sacrifices that often go unseen. My life before the diagnosis was a carefully constructed balance. I owned a small, successful graphic design business that I ran from a studio in my home. My husband, Mark, is a high school history teacher, and together we lived a quiet, predictable life in a modest house we had slowly been renovating. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable and happy. Our world was one of client deadlines, faculty meetings, and weekend trips to the farmer's market. Julian's world was different. At 34, he was a perpetual next big thing. He lived in a sunny corner of California, always in the midst of launching some revolutionary tech startup that was just on the cusp of changing the world. He had charisma in spades, a quality my parents, Arthur and Rosalind, had always mistaken for genius. They adored him, funding his ventures and boasting about his ambition to their friends, conveniently ignoring the fact that none of his projects had ever turned a profit. This dynamic was the bedrock of our family. I was the responsible one, Julian was the promising one. When my first car broke down in college, my father told me that learning to budget for repairs was a valuable life lesson. A month later, when Julian wanted to find himself after a tough semester, they paid for a 6-week trip through Europe. I was practical, he was an experience. I was a safe investment, he was a high-risk, high-reward bet they were willing to make again and again. The call that changed the balance forever came from my father, Arthur. His voice, usually so steady and confident, was trembling. "It's your mother," he said, his words choked. "She had a fall. She went for a walk and got lost. A neighbor found her 3 blocks away, confused and crying. The doctors, they've confirmed it. It's early onset dementia." The diagnosis was a gut punch, but not a total surprise. We had all noticed Mom's increasing forgetfulness over the past year, the missed appointments, the repeated stories, the confusion over simple tasks, but we had all participated in a silent conspiracy of denial, calling it simple aging. Now denial was no longer an option. She couldn't live alone safely anymore. I drove to their house immediately, my mind racing. 1,000 practical questions flooded my thoughts. Long-term care, power of attorney, medical costs. My father was overwhelmed, lost in his grief. "What are we going to do?" he asked me with the lost eyes of a child. I called Julian that night. "I'm on my way," I told him. "I'm moving Mom in with me for now, until we can figure out a long-term plan." "Oh, Thea," he said, his voice dripping with practiced empathy. I'm in the middle of a huge funding round right now. I'm chained to my desk, otherwise I'd be on the next flight. But whatever you need, I'm here. Financially, emotionally, you name it. We're a team." A team. I clung to that word. For the first time, I thought, maybe this crisis would be the thing to finally unite us, to make us equals. I had no idea that his definition of team was one in which I did all the work and he reaped all the benefits. The very next day, I packed a bag for my mother and moved her into our guest room. The carefully constructed balance of my life shattered in an instant. The first few months were a descent into a new kind of reality. My mother's dementia was a cruel thief, stealing pieces of her memory and personality day by day. One moment she would be her old self, sharp and witty, and the next she would look at me with vacant eyes, asking where her husband was, even if my father was sitting right beside her. My life became a series of alarms and routines, medication schedules, doctor's appointments, endless loads of laundry, and the constant, draining vigilance required to keep her safe. My work, once my passion, became a source of stress. I lost clients who weren't willing to wait while I handled a sudden caregiving emergency. My income dropped by half. Mark was incredible, taking on extra chores, cooking meals, and providing a steady stream of emotional support. But the strain on our marriage was undeniable. Our quiet evenings were replaced by the sound of my mother's television, and our conversations were constantly interrupted by her needs. My father was a frequent visitor, but not a helpful one. He would sit with Mom for an hour, sharing old stories, and then leave just as the difficult part of the day began, what the doctors called sundowning, when her confusion and agitation peaked. He couldn't handle her when she wasn't the woman he had married. He would call me later, his voice filled with anguish. "She didn't know who I was today, Thea." "I know, Dad," I would say, my own exhaustion a heavy blanket on my voice. "It's hard." "I just don't know how you do it," he would say, a statement that was meant as a compliment, but felt like an abdication. And Julian? Julian was a master of performative support. He called every few days, his voice a perfect blend of concern and encouragement. "How's our girl doing today, Thea?" he would ask. "We had a tough morning, Julian." She was very confused. I would reply, hoping for a moment of real connection. "You're an angel for what you're doing, Thea, a total rock star. Hey, listen, I'm about to jump into a meeting with some venture capitalists, but I'm sending all my love. I'll wire some money for her expenses at the end of the week." He said this every week. The money never came. Instead, he would send expensive and practical gifts, a cashmere blanket for a woman who was constantly hot, a complex puzzle for a woman who could no longer focus, a gourmet food basket filled with items her restricted diet didn't allow. They were gestures designed to look like caring from a distance, while I was the one on the ground, dealing with the messy, heartbreaking reality. The financial strain became a crisis. My mother's medication was expensive. I had to hire an in-home aide for a few hours a week just so I could have a moment to breathe, a cost that was quickly draining my own savings. "We have to sell the house," I told my father one evening. "Mom and Dad's house. Is the only way we can afford proper memory care for her. She needs more than I can give her." My father looked stricken. "Sell the house, Thea? That's our home. Your mother would be devastated." "Dad, Mom doesn't even recognize the house anymore. Last week she asked me when we were moving into this nice hotel. What she needs is a safe environment with professional care. We have no other assets." I called Julian to tell him the plan. His reaction was swift and furious. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice cold. "That house is our childhood. It's filled with memories. You can't just sell it off like it's nothing." "It's not nothing, Julian. It's the only way to pay for Mom's care. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what needs to happen." "There are other ways," he insisted. "I'm on the verge of closing this huge deal. Just give me 6 more months. I can cover everything then." It was the same promise I had been hearing for years. 6 more months. His big break was always just around the corner, a perpetually receding horizon of fantasy. "We don't have 6 months," I said, my patience worn to a thread.
We have credit card bills and the looming medical crisis. The house has to be sold." "I won't allow it," he said. "As her son, I have a say." "Really?" I asked, the bitterness finally spilling over. "You have a say? You haven't seen her in person in 8 months. You haven't changed a single diaper, cooked a single meal, or sat with her through a single night of confusion. You don't get a say. You get to either help or get out of the way." I hung up before he could reply. The line had been drawn. I knew the fight to sell the house would be ugly, but I had no idea it would lead me to a discovery that would unravel the last thread of our family fabric.
The process of emptying a childhood home is a unique form of archaeology. Each box opened is a dig site, unearthing forgotten artifacts of a life that once was. Because Julian refused to participate, claiming he was too busy and that it was too emotional for him, the entire weight of the task fell on me and Mark. For 3 weekends, we waded through 40 years of accumulated memories. My father was useless, wandering through the rooms like a ghost, picking up objects only to set them down again, lost in a fog of nostalgia and grief. We sorted things into piles: keep, donate, trash. It was physically and emotionally exhausting. I found my old art projects, Serafina's music awards, photo albums filled with smiling strangers who were once my parents. The house was a time capsule, and I was its reluctant curator. The discovery happened on the final weekend. I was in my parents' home office, a small wood-paneled room that always smelled faintly of my father's pipe tobacco. I was clearing out the bottom drawer of a large metal filing cabinet, a drawer filled with old tax returns and appliance warranties. Tucked at the very back, beneath a stack of yellowed newspapers, was a small, locked metal box. It was a simple cash box, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store. I recognized it immediately. It was where my mother kept important documents: birth certificates, passports, the deed to the house. I found the key in its usual hiding place, taped to the underside of my father's desk drawer. With a click, the lock opened. Inside, I expected to find the documents I remembered. Instead, I found a stack of journals. They were simple, spiral-bound notebooks, each labeled with a year. My mother's elegant, looping handwriting covered every page. I had never known her to keep a diary. She was a private, composed woman, not one for bearing her soul on paper. My first thought was that this was a violation of her privacy, but something compelled me to open the one on top, the one labeled with the year Julian had moved to California. I sat on the floor, the dusty scent of old paper filling the air, and began to read. The first few entries were what I expected: notes about her garden, comments on a book she was reading, worries about my father's cholesterol. Then I found the first mention of the money. October 14th. Julian called today, so excited about his new app idea. It sounds brilliant, something to do with social networking for pet owners. He needs $20,000 for the initial development. Arthur is hesitant. He says we need to rebuild our retirement fund after the last market downturn. But I can't bear to see Julian's dream deferred. He has so much potential. We decided to take it from the home equity line. Arthur thinks it's a mistake, but a mother has to believe in her son. I flipped through the pages, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. The entries continued, a steady, heartbreaking rhythm of hope and financial drain. March 22nd. The first venture didn't pan out, but Julian has a new, even better idea: a boutique marketing firm. He says he already has clients lined up. He just needs $50,000 for office space and equipment. Arthur put his foot down this time. We had a terrible fight. Arthur said we were enabling him, that Julian needs to learn to stand on his own. I told him that you don't give up on your children. We cashed in some of the stocks we were saving for the new roof. My hands were trembling.
the new roof they had complained about not being able to afford, the reason the upstairs bathroom had a persistent leak. I read on, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. The journal wasn't just a diary, it was a secret ledger of my parents' financial ruin, written in the language of a mother's desperate, blind love. August 5th. Julian needed another $30,000. He said it was the last bet, that he was on the verge of landing a huge contract. Arthur didn't even argue this time. He just looked tired. We had to take out a second mortgage on the house. We haven't told Thea. She wouldn't understand. She has always been so sensible, so careful with her money. She doesn't understand the risks you have to take for a big dream. The entry spanned a decade. Over and over, the same story. Julian's call, his exciting new idea, his request for money, my mother's unwavering belief, and my father's weary capitulation. It was all there, in black and white. They hadn't just funded his life, they had sacrificed their own financial security for it. They had drained their retirement, sold their assets, and mortgaged their home to the hilt, all to pour money into the black hole of his son's ambition. And they had hidden it all from me. The secret wasn't just about the money. It was about the lie we had all been living. The lie that Julian was the successful one, and I was the one who had settled for a small, safe life. The truth was, his entire life was a performance funded by our parents' slow-motion bankruptcy. The reason they couldn't afford professional care for my mother wasn't a lack of planning. It was a lack of funds that had been siphoned away $30,000 at a time. The house wasn't just a house. It was the last asset they had left, and my brother was fighting to protect it not for sentimental reasons, but because its sale would expose the truth of his decade-long financial con.
I sat on the floor of that dusty office for what felt like hours. The journals spread around me like an indictment. Every page was a testament to a family dynamic I had always felt but never fully understood. I was the sensible one, the one who was expected to be self-sufficient because all the family's emotional and financial resources were being funneled into the Jenga tower of Julian's life. When Mark found me, my face was stained with tears. "What is it? What did you find?" he asked, kneeling beside me. I couldn't speak. I just handed him one of the journals. He read in silence, his expression hardening with each entry he scanned. "My God," he whispered, looking up at me. "He's been bleeding them dry for years, and your dad knew. He let it happen." The realization that my father was complicit was almost as painful as the initial discovery. He had pretended to be the reluctant, responsible one, but he had enabled it every step of the way, all while lecturing me about financial prudence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt a volcanic rage building inside me, a rage born of years of being underestimated, of being the dependable background character in my own family's story. The lies, the hypocrisy, the sheer staggering injustice of it all. It was too much. The next morning, I called a family meeting. I told my father and Julian I had found some old financial documents we needed to review before meeting with the real estate agent. I told them to meet me at the house at noon. I didn't mention the journals. "I'm a little busy, Thea," Julian said, his voice laced with the familiar sound of his own self-importance. "Can't you just handle it?" "No, Julian," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "This is something you need to see for yourself. Noon. Don't be late." I arrived at the house at 11:30 a.m. I arranged the journals on the dining room table, opening each one to a particularly damning entry. I placed my phone on the sideboard, set to record audio. This was not a conversation I would allow to be distorted by memory. My father arrived first, looking anxious. He saw the journals on the table, and his face went white. "Where did you find those?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper.
"In the office, in Mom's locked box," I replied, not taking my eyes off him. "I see you've been busy," he said, sinking into a chair. The fight seemed to drain out of him in an instant. He knew the game was up. Julian arrived at 12:05, strolling in with the easy confidence of a man who has never had to face a real consequence in his life. He was on his phone, laughing at something. "Sorry I'm late. The traffic was—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the scene at the dining room table. Me, silent and watchful, our father, pale and defeated, and the open journals spread across the table. "What's all this?" he asked, his smile faltering. "A little light reading," I said, gesturing to a chair. "It's Mom's diary. She was a surprisingly meticulous record keeper, especially when it came to finances." He walked slowly to the table and looked down. His eyes scanned an entry detailing a $40,000 investment he needed for a guaranteed real estate deal that had apparently vanished without a trace. The color drained from his face. "This is a violation of her privacy," he stammered, his first instinct to deflect. "You have no right." "I have the power of attorney my father just signed over to me this morning," I said, sliding the freshly notarized document across the table. "I have every right. I have the right to know why my mother is facing a future without professional care, while her son has been living a fantasy life funded by her retirement." "That's not true," he protested, his voice rising. "These were loans, investments. I was going to pay them all back." "Were you?" I asked, my voice calm. "Because, according to this entry from last year, you told Mom that the reason you couldn't pay back the first loan was because your identity was stolen, a story you seem to have forgotten you also told Dad 3 years prior regarding a different loan." I looked at my father. "You knew. You knew all along, didn't you? You knew he was lying, and you let him do it. You let him drain your life savings." My father couldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at his hands, which were trembling slightly. "Your mother, she always saw the best in him," he mumbled. "I didn't want to break her heart." "So you broke her future instead?" I shot back. "You let her son's lies bankrupt you, and now you want me to clean up the mess? You want me to sacrifice my life, my marriage, and my own financial stability to continue propping up this charade?" I turned my attention back to Julian, who was now backed into a corner, his usual charm replaced by a desperate, cornered animal panic. "This house is being sold," I stated, not as a proposal, but as a fact. "And the proceeds are not going to fund your next brilliant idea. They are going into a trust, managed by me for the sole purpose of paying for Mom's long-term care. You will not see a single penny of it." Julian's face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You can't do that," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I am his son. I have a right to my inheritance." "What inheritance?" I asked, my voice laced with an icy calm I didn't know I possessed. "There is nothing left. You saw to that. This isn't about an inheritance, Julian. This is about restitution. You have been living on an advance of your mother's well-being, and the debt has just come due." He lunged across the table, his face inches from mine. "You have always been jealous of me," he spat. "You with your small, safe life. You could never stand that I had bigger dreams, that I wasn't afraid to take risks." "I'm not jealous of your dreams, Julian," I said, not flinching. "I'm disgusted by who you forced our parents to pay for them. They sacrificed their security for your fantasy. They chose your potential over their own reality over and over again. And the sickest part is, they hid it from me. Because they knew. They knew I was the only one who would tell them the truth." I stood up, the journals a fortress wall in front of me. "So here is the truth. From this moment on, I am in charge. I hold the power of attorney. I will be managing all of their affairs. The house will be listed for sale on Monday." My father finally looked up, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. "Thea, please," he started. "No." I cut him off. "You lost the right to say please when you stood by and watched this happen. You have two choices, Dad. You can either support me in this, or you can side with him. But if you side with him, you can find someone else to manage your future, because I will be done." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and absolute. My father looked at his son, the golden boy, now exposed as a fraud. He looked at me, the daughter he had always taken for granted, now holding all the cards. The choice was a painful one, a choice between his favorite child and his only hope for a stable future. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he looked at Julian. "She's right, son," he said, his voice cracking. "It's over." Julian stared at him, betrayed. Then he turned his gaze to me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was chilling. "You will regret this," he whispered. "I already regret the last 10 years, I replied. "Now get out of this house." He didn't move. "Get out!" I screamed, the years of suppressed anger finally erupting. He flinched as if struck, and without another word he turned and stalked out of the house, slamming the front door behind him. The silence he left behind was profound. My father sat at the table, a broken man. I looked at him, not with triumph, but with a deep, aching sadness. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked quietly. "We were ashamed," he said, his voice hoarse. "And we were scared. Scared that you would judge us, scared that you would be right." "I am right," I said, the anger gone, replaced with exhaustion. "But I'm not judging you, Dad. I'm just fixing it. Because that's what I've always done." I sat down across from him, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the parent, and he, the child. The long, difficult process of untangling the mess had just begun.
The year that followed was one of painful reconstruction. True to my word, I sold the house. It sold quickly, and the proceeds were enough to place my mother in an excellent memory care facility near my home. The facility was bright and cheerful, with kind staff and beautiful gardens where she could walk safely. Visiting her there was bittersweet. Some days she was lucid and we would talk about her childhood. On other days, she would look at me with no recognition at all. But she was safe, she was cared for, and she was at peace. That was all I could ask for. My father moved into a small senior apartment. He struggled with the downsize, with the loneliness, and with the immense weight of his guilt. Our relationship was strained and awkward. We met for lunch once a month, our conversations stilted, circling around the edges of the chasm that now lay between us. He never fully forgave me for exposing the truth, and I never fully forgave him for hiding it. But we maintained a fragile truce, bound by our shared love for the woman we were both, in our own ways, losing. Julian disappeared from our lives. He sent one final vitriolic email blaming me for ruining his life and his relationship with his parents. He claimed his big deal had just been about to close and that I had sabotaged it. I deleted the email without responding. I heard through a cousin that his startup had predictably folded and that he was now working a menial sales job, living in a tiny apartment, and was deep in debt. He never called his mother. He never called his father. The golden child, stripped of his funding, had no more use for the family that had adored him. My own life, freed from the invisible weight of my family's secrets, began to flourish. My business thrived. Mark and I, our bond forged stronger in the crucible of the crisis, started talking about our own future, about maybe even starting a family, a prospect that had once seemed impossible amidst the chaos. I found that the space in my life that had been occupied by worrying about my family was now free for me to fill with my own dreams. One afternoon, while visiting my mother, I brought the journals with me. She was having a good day, her eyes clear, her mind present. "I found these, Mom," I said gently, placing them on the table beside her. She looked at them, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "My silly little notebooks," she said with a faint smile. "I remember. I was so worried about your brother. I thought if I just believed in him enough, he would succeed." "You loved him very much," I said, my voice soft. "Oh, yes," she said, her gaze turning to the window. "But I should have loved you better, Thea. You were always so strong, I forgot that you needed me too." It wasn't a perfect apology, and it wasn't a magic fix for years of imbalance, but it was an acknowledgement. It was the truth. And in that moment, it was enough. The real inheritance my mother left me wasn't in a will or a bank account. It was in those journals. They had given me the painful, liberating truth, a truth that had allowed me to finally break free and redefine my own life, not as a supporting character, but as the protagonist of my own story. Have you ever been the responsible one in your family? How did you learn to set boundaries and prioritize your own needs? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more stories about the complex, beautiful, and often difficult bonds of family. Remember that your well-being is not a selfish priority. It is a necessary foundation for a healthy life. Thank you for listening.